Welcome back. Here with us on Urban Debate on Mirror Now, and joining me right now is former Vice Chairman Niti Aayog and Professor of Columbia University, Mr. Arvind Panagariya. Sir, thank you very much for joining us here on Mirror Now this evening. 14-month-long agitation of the farmers is finally getting over. That's the time we are speaking after the government decided to repeal the 3 laws and kept all demands, including MSP. Your reaction to the way the government handled this entire situation? Because many, of course, called it a 1991 moment for the farm sector. Do you see it as a climb down?
See, so I agree more or less with the 1991 moment description. Because the farm laws fundamentally were for the good of the farmers. This consensus had actually existed. It's not, the BJP or this party or that party. It was, from all quarters. Every government since, let's say, about 2002 or so, that has been there has tried to promote these reforms. And the bulk of the farmers really were not even agitating. It was farmers from the 2 states, and the fundamental, obviously, now it's even clearer from what we have seen transpiring in the last month or 2, that the main issue they had was with MSP and not with the farm laws, but farm laws provided them a good kind of peg on which to hang the entire agitation. So I think I agree with that description. Has the government handled it well? I think, for that one has to know a bit more why after such a long time the government agreed to repeal the laws, accept the demands. Very likely, I think, one of the things I hear is that there was a fear that this movement was turning into a Sikh versus Hindu or Sarkar versus Sardar. And if that were the case, then evidently, I think, in the national interest, the government had to do it. The Prime Minister certainly in his speech said that, he brought the laws for the good of the farmers, but he is withdrawing them for the nation. So those, I think if that is the explanation, meaning that the fear of this turning into a very different kind of movement, then it was the right thing to do.
So you've also written a piece on the minimum support price, the contentious issue, one of the demands, of course, of the farmers as well. According to you, money for the scheme can instead provide about 21,000 rupees annually to every poor family. What should be the correct approach, according to you, to deal with this demand of MSP by the farmers? Because now we know that there's going to be a committee.
Yeah. Right. No, I mean, I certainly think that even the farmers themselves should think about it. How do they feel about, effectively coaxing the taxpayer into making this transfer to them? I mean, look, there is nothing else for which we guarantee the prices to anybody. Everybody who sells their product and every entrepreneur has to find their markets, find their customers. You can't, say that the taxpayer has to, whatever I produce should be purchased by the taxpayer money, or that some specific price ought to be paid to me by the taxpayer. I think this is just not done in a democratic system, not even in authoritarian systems. Even the whole initial idea of MSP was not to kind of make these kinds of transfers to the farmers. The original idea was that India was having a very serious food shortage. This is like, it goes back to the 60s. And there was not enough food to go around with, and India was dependent very heavily on the United States. Those were the conditions under which some of the subsidies were introduced, including the MSP, that let us incentivize the farmers to produce more. There was a national security issue there via food security. But today that is not the case. Now we produce plenty of food and all, and so that particular basis on which initially the system had been introduced is no more there. And now to say that whatever the farmer produces gives the farmer the guarantee of this price, I think it's grossly unfair to the rest of the country, especially the taxpayers, and also to India's poor. I mean, I quote in my article today in the Times of India that, look, only 54% of the rural households are actually farmers. And of them, only about 6 or 7% of all rural households have more than 2 hectare land. So obviously, who is receiving all this subsidy? This will go to the bigger farmers, those who are not even farmers, not cultivators, which is about 46% of rural households, which have a large number of landless laborers. They get nothing. So this is why I make the pitch that, look, if you're going to something of the order of at least close to 1.5 lakh crore rupees per year on MSP, give it to the actually poor households. And if you give it to the 40% of the bottom households, meaning by income, 40% of the poorest households, you can give them almost 21,000 rupees per year, which would practically bring all of them out of abject poverty.
And, that's government's objective as well, to double farmers' income, isn't it, sir?
I mean, yeah, well, look, isn't it the objective of the entire nation? I mean, when we talk about growth and everything, why do we want to grow? It is to combat poverty and bring prosperity to people. It's not, the objective is not to bring prosperity to just a handful of the farmers who have lots of land and can potentially produce a lot of wheat and rice.
Right.
So that's not the objective of the nation. Nation's objective is to combat poverty.
Yes. No, I agree. That is an important point that you're making, sir. But do you think in some way or the other, political compulsion seems to be impacting now government's reform agenda, at least in the second term? Because we all know what happened with the land acquisition bill, and now farm laws had to be repealed too?
I wouldn't say so. This was one-off. If you look at it, Land Acquisition Act was a very early effort, which failed. But at that time, the government didn't have enough votes in Rajya Sabha, which is not the case now. These were democratically passed, meaning, there is a government which has been overwhelmingly voted into power by the voter. So the laws were passed by a parliament that represented the people. So it was really, a small minority of the farmers who happened to, in the states which happen to have common border with Delhi. And so you can, collect a few tens of thousands of people to block the highways for a whole year. I think this is a very different kind of thing that has happened. If you look at a lot else that the NDA has already done, there's labor law reform they have done, the GST they have done, the IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, numerous other things on digitization, Aadhaar cards, a huge number of things that have been done. And labor laws, which had been in fact contentious for goodness, almost 30 years. That was on the agenda in 1991, but never took off. And after that, the Vajpayee government tried to do that and then couldn't do it. So labor laws have been done also. So it's not, I'm not pessimistic. Generally, there is consensus, and certainly, I don't think the Prime Minister has lost his will to carry forward with the reforms. He wants to take the nation forward. So I have full faith in the Prime Minister that he's not going to back off. Every government has to occasionally make compromises. It's simply that in this case, it happened a bit after a long drawn agitation. I remember, under Prime Minister Vajpayee, they had, this had to do with the urea price that Finance Minister Sinha, Yashwant Sinha, had raised the urea price by just 1 or 2 rupees or some very small amount, and there was such a hue and cry. So he actually then reversed it, and people started calling him rollback Sinha. But that didn't stop the other reforms. I think, Vajpayee era reforms is what helped ultimately India to grow at 8% or more for almost a decade.
In fact, now I want to focus a lot more on the issue of economic recovery. RBI has retained, sir, its growth target for the current financial year at 9.5%. Fitch, however, has slashed it to 8.4%. What is your assessment about the possible impact of Omicron in India's economic recovery? Do you think it's going to be faster than expected?
Yeah, so look, I have maintained throughout that the virus is very, very unpredictable. Anybody who tries to predict finds, is humbled. Lots of our epidemiologists were predicting, for example, a third wave in October. That didn't happen. But it also means that it doesn't mean I can predict what will happen in January or February. So that threat, I have no idea. I mean, simply because it has behaved so erratically, both geographically as well as in time. So predictability of either the geography of its waves or of the timing is just uncertain. So only thing I feel good with is that we have done tremendous job of vaccination. Today, in terms of a single jab, India is ahead of the United States. If you calculate the adult population, we have done more than 85%, which is more than what the United States has done in terms of one jab. We are still, I think, in terms of 2 jabs, we are still behind the United States, well behind. But that is a huge achievement. More than 50% of the adults have been vaccinated. So I think in terms of severe impact, I think we are protected. And if necessary, for a third booster jab, we ought to, we'll know very soon. I think the government knows and is discussing that. So outside of that, I'm with the RBI. I think we might even touch double digit this particular year. This last quarter was 8.4%, but don't forget the quarter before that was about 20% on the back of low base naturally. So the RBI is well within ballpark. If you don't have to grow actually. If we manage to grow even 7% in the next 2 quarters. We would have achieved actually the RBI target. So I'm with it. I think, this is very likely it will happen.
You are expecting a double-digit growth, but then should we actually be happy about a V-shaped recovery? Should we celebrate it really?
Okay, I think, this now comes down to really seeing the glass half full or half empty. This was not an ordinary shock that we have gone through or we are still going through. It is completely unprecedented. It is something which impacted both demand and supply side factors. So personally, I actually see the glass half on almost 80% full, I should say. We have recovered quite remarkably well. After 7% we had gone down. Very soon we already are actually above pre-COVID GDP levels, the 8.4% in the latest quarter for which we got the numbers. We are already above where we were prior to the pandemic. I'd not really like to see, what I'd really like to see that, okay, so we have come back and hopefully we can stay above the pre-COVID level of GDP, but that now we can from that level push to about 8% growth going forward over the next decade. That's what I would like to see. And for that, we have to continue on the road to reforms. I have said, look, there are 3 or 4 really big reforms that the government has done. The IPC I mentioned, labor law reforms, the GST, and fourth one is the bringing our corporate profit tax to the global levels. So 4 of those, and these are all mutually reinforcing reforms. So they will yield results. We still haven't reaped full results of these reforms, and these ought to come. But we need to do a little bit more. If you want to talk about that, we can certainly talk about that.
But sir, the opposition is calling the claims of government on economic recovery hollow. On one hand, we're talking about 8.5% or 9.5% growth. But if you see, the fuel prices are near an all-time high, and it is impacting the middle class. So for the middle class, I mean, is this really a good growth that we are seeing?
You know, if the opposition wants the MSP to be extended to everybody, MSP opposition wants everybody to get jobs and all, and then opposition also wants nobody to pay taxes. How can that happen? I mean, you know, you can't around that square. I mean, somebody will have to pay taxes, and so if the oil crude prices are still high, I mean they've fallen a little bit, but still remain high. The petrol prices would remain high. I mean, you know, so in such situations for the specific items, households have to economize to some degree. But the general rate of inflation, certainly in India, is well within the tolerance range. I mean, the target that is given by law to the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, is between 2 and 6%, and the inflation is between 2 and 6%. It's below 6%. You know, if the recovery had not happened, then they would have. Then the opposition would also say that, oh look, you know, you have not been able to bring the GDP up. To me, it seems that ultimately GDP we are measuring after correcting for inflation. It is real GDP, so it's a real purchasing power we are talking about. So if the real purchasing power has been brought back to the level or somewhat higher than where it was pre-pandemic, I think there is something to celebrate, not something to scoff at. If you are only looking for problems, we can find plenty. I mean, you know, you can give me any economy at any point in time. I can give you certain problems with it, even in the best of the times. I mean, China is extremely prosperous today. I can tell you a lot of problems with China today. So these things will remain. I mean, I take a more kind of positive approach to these issues that, you know, where the problems exist, let's work on them. But let's not scoff at what we have been able to achieve.
Sir, I also want to talk to you about the issue of unemployment. How can India really solve that issue? Because it was there even before pandemic came into our lives.
Yeah. So, Heena, here my take is a little different than most others. If you look at, you know, pre-pandemic data, unemployment rate is not overly high in India. About 6% is what is estimated. This is the periodic labor force survey of 2018-19. India's problem, to me, has always been and remains underemployment, which means that, you know, often 2 people are doing a job that can be very easily performed by 1 person. And so it translates into very low labor productivity and therefore low wages and low value added per person. That has been a problem, and that is a much longer term, deeper problem, structural problem. We simply have not done a good job of creating jobs for those with relatively limited skills. You know, with 45% now of the workforce already is still in farming, in agriculture. Also, the non-agricultural workforce, almost 42-43% of it is employed in enterprises with less than 20 workers. Productivity in those small enterprises is not very high. And so we need some of the labor-intensive sectors like clothing, like footwear, like furniture, a lot of light manufacturers, kinds of things that China used to export in very large numbers, large volumes in the 1980s and 1990s. We need to really create larger firms in these sectors, which can then pull in a lot of the workers out of agriculture into gainful employment. That is what we need to do. Now, labor law reforms clearly are a correct step in that direction. But we also need to, one of the things we are not doing right is going back to protectionism. I see the opposition raising no voices against it. That is the substantive policy problem against which the voices should be very loud, actually, but the opposition says nothing about it. Ultimately, if you are going to conquer the global markets, gainful employment will be created through the export-oriented industries, through the export-oriented enterprises, which are generally larger than these 20 worker or fewer worker enterprises. Then you need open economy. And we have been raising our protection, raising tariffs. I think we need to move away from that. So that's one of the things that's very important, if you're going to turn this 7 to 8% growth, which I expect to happen, to 10%, then you need open markets, you need to capture global markets, and you don't, through import substitution, capture global markets. You simply, reserve your own market for your own inefficient manufacturers. That's what you do through high tariffs and protection. You don't create global winners, export powerhouses by these import substitution policies. So that's one thing we need to do. Privatization is another one. So that's moving now. Finally, I think, we have had another enterprise privatized very recently for 200 crore rupees. So that is a good news on that front, but that has to keep accelerating.
You're concerned about the issue of protectionism, but sir, what are your views on the issue of cryptocurrency?
So I'm not an expert on cryptocurrencies, Heena, but my general sense is that, we certainly shouldn't ban these things because you can ban them, they will not disappear. So perhaps, find proper ways to regulate and create incentives for people to report their transactions. Ultimately they can be tax havens. So that tax avoidance ought to be controlled. So for that, create a good environment in which the users would be encouraged to report their transactions. So there's some fears of money laundering. But cryptocurrency is not the only avenue through which this happens. Cryptocurrency is very new, but money laundering has been going on in India for a very long time. So just as we have to deal with the other avenues, I think we ought to try to deal with this avenue as well. That's my general, as I said, I'm not an expert on cryptocurrency, so my word should be not at least on this issue, I don't claim a whole lot of knowledge.
And lastly, before we let you go, your advice to the government as we enter into the year 2022.
Well, for the government, of course, one thing is to keep momentum on vaccination. Don't lose momentum. We've been doing about close to between 6 and 7 million a day. That momentum ought to be maintained. That's extremely, I think, the most important. Alongside, I think people have to do their bit. They, I think, are not doing it, both in the United States and in India. We have to wear masks. We have to stay with washing our hands frequently. The government can only do so much. Everybody looks to the central government to do everything, but the central government ultimately is not. Really, central government becomes the first resort, Not punching bag, saying, they mean, so the first resort, you first go to anything goes wrong, you go to the central government, A lot of the things have to be done actually by the state governments. Nobody sort of asks anything about the state governments, anything goes wrong, it's the central government's fault. So, and the citizens also have to do their bit, as I said, the basic things about masks, etc. We have to do it. So that, but for the government, I very much hope in the new budget, that it offers more reforms and is bold, in the way the previous budget was. I would think, that many areas still left. I mentioned about trade liberalization. That's already one that ought to be really very important area. There should be a very strong commitment to do free trade agreements with the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, these countries. So that's on the trade side, but we also need a new Higher Education Commission Act. Just as we did in medical education, there ought to be a National Higher Education Commission, which replaces Commission Act, which replaces the 1956 University Grants Commission Act. High time, that we modernize the regulation in higher education. Extremely important, that ought to be done. Then direct taxation reform has to happen big time. I think that is another third very important area of reform, which ought to be on the forthcoming budget. So I think, these are 2-3 really big ticket reforms still waiting to be done. And I hope they are on the next budget agenda.
All right, Mr. Panagariya, appreciate you joining us here on Mirror Now. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And you gave a long list of reforms that the government should really now be focusing on. Thank you very much.